Chess is a deep and complex game that takes years to master. However, if you learn some general principles, you'll be way ahead of the average player. Be able to play some games with your friends. You'll have the building blocks to become a good player if you'd like to learn more about the game. Today we're going to talk about some opening principles. Principles include gaining space in the center, activating your pieces, getting your king to safety. If you can complete these 3 steps within the first 10 moves of a chess game, you'll be well on your way to a good position. First step in any chess game is choosing a good starting move. The starting move that I like to play is e4. The reason I like this move is because it gains space in the center. It opens diagonals for my pieces. As you can see, before we moved the pawn, the bishop and the queen were blocked by the pawn. These pieces cannot jump over pieces, so in order to develop them, or remove them from their starting squares, we need to open lines. e4 does this quite nicely. It also places a pawn in the center of the board. This pawn controls important squares that your opponent wants to put his pieces on. If your opponent were to put a piece on one of these 2 squares, the pawn could capture it. Second step is to activate your pieces. Activating pieces, putting them on good squares where they can attack a lot of squares, and those squares are important. As you can see, this knight only see these 3 squares at the moment. They're not very important squares. They're squares that you control very well. They're not central squares that you want to fight over. This square is a much more active square for the knight. It controls this square, and this square. 3 squares your opponent wants to control and put his pieces on. Bishop placed on this square is much more active than his starting square, because he can now see squares across all 4 directions. Whereas when he was at the starting square, he could only see squares one direction, because he's blocked off the other way by his pieces and the edge of the board. Very important to place your pieces towards the center so they can be more active. Third step in completing development is to get your king to safety. Once there are no pieces between the king and either rook, you can move the king over twice and switch it with the rook. It's a completely legal move in chess called castling. It's mandatory in order to get your king to safety. It also brings the rook towards the center of the board so that it can be activated later, supporting the center. Final step to completing development is to connect the rooks. You want to get 2 pawns in the center, get all your pieces out to ideal squares so that the rooks can see each other. This is an ideal setup and can't be achieved in most games, as your opponent will try to stop you from doing these things, try to do them himself. However, if we could get perfect dream setup, this is what it would be. All the pieces are placed in the center. They're attacking central squares, important squares that your opponent wants to control. The rooks are connected and can move freely along the back rank toward the pieces. If you attempt to do this in your games, you'll be guaranteed to get a good position. And if your opponent doesn't know these things, you'll crush them. If you ever play a game of chess, I want you to remember these principles. Strive towards getting your pieces in the center, gaining space, connecting the rooks, getting the king to safety.